Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you a little bit of our analysis about what went down last night and what's been going down over the last few weeks in Minneapolis public schools, especially around this conversation around returning to in-person school. And we have a special guest with us. We have Kulia Pringle, who is the coordinator of family engagement and advocacy with the Minnesota Parent Union. How are you doing today, Kulia?
I'm good, can't complain. Or I can, but I won't.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us. Heather, how are you doing?
It's a big day today.
Yeah, huge day. Very excited. And so we'll keep this brief so that we can catch the inauguration and we can, also debrief everything else that's been going on over the last several weeks. But Kulia, wanted to start with you. Tell us a little bit about, the parent union and, what's been your involvement with the decision around Minneapolis public schools going back to school, and where have you all stood, where have parents stood, and what's the conversation been like?
Yeah, the Minnesota Parent Union is a recently launched nonprofit organization that supports family navigating the education system. And we try to do that in a variety of ways. Our main way is one-on-one support. So we provide one-on-one support to families. That support could look any way the family wants it to look. It could be a simple question. It could be advocacy, it could be going to meetings, going to parent conferences, whatever the family needs, we respond. We also engage families by giving them knowledge, tools, and skills in order for them to advocate for themselves, but also advocate collectively. And then the third part is like organizing and mobilizing families so that we can transform the education system and truly change policy so that the system works truly for all children. My involvement in school reopening, as I stated, is I do one-on-one support. And that one-on-one support entails getting to know families and what their needs are, how can the education system support them and their child's education needs. Um, and as the parent union, we were seeing a mix. We were seeing families that desperately needed to get back, and we were seeing families that were saying that their kids were thriving at home, and this was the best situation that could have ever happened. And so our position at the Minnesota Parent Union is that we respond to what families want. Those who want to stay home, we support, and those who need to go back, we support. We don't say, one is better than the other. Whatever the family needs is what the district should be providing. So that's the stance we took. There were families that needed and wanted to go back for a variety of reasons, whether it was childcare, lack of support coming in, their children needing more in-person support. And we supported that. We support families getting all the resources that they need, whether that's in person or through distance learning or a hybrid model.
Awesome. So, what was y'all's thoughts on the plan for Minneapolis to send elementary school students back into school? What was the choice? Again, like you said, but it was the choice for families around whether the elementary school students, if they wanted to go back. What was your stance on that? How did y'all feel about really the decision that got approved last night at the school board meeting?
We're happy about it. Like I said, we're not necessarily for whether the district opens the school or doesn't open the school. We are for whatever families want. And many families are saying that they are desperately needing to send their kids back to school. So for those families that need that in-person support, we are very happy that the board voted on a majority to have our youngest kids go back to school.
Yeah, that's great. So, Heather, wanted to kick it to you, especially with having students who go to Minneapolis public schools. Even though they're not elementary students, they're just a few years removed from elementary school and from this decision. What are your thoughts? What did you think about last night's discussion, last week's discussion, and would you feel safe sending your students back? What choice would you make? How do you feel about everything that has been going down over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with Kulia in that, like, I don't think there's a clear yes or a clear no on either side. I have one student that has thrived in distance learning and has never been happier. And I have a student that's really struggling in distance learning and would like to go back. And I really think, you know, the perspective that I would like to say is like, I think that we need choices. I think that we need choices. I find myself very curious about how students of color will re-enter into buildings after having not had their bodies watched so closely by white teachers. I mean, there's just so many layers to these decisions, but I do think it is about choice and autonomy and honoring specifically the families that have not been the center of decision making for a long time, which is families and students of color of Minneapolis public schools.
Yeah, I tend to feel similarly. I'll say again and again, I don't know what the right decision is. If I had kids, I don't know if I would send them to school or keep them at home. I'm inclined to say that I'd probably keep them at home just because that's how I feel. But I also know that my own personal values do not dictate what other families need and want. And right. And so I think what I thought was important about this decision and really unique, I think, about this decision was that the way that Minneapolis is doing this, I don't necessarily think this is about whether they know what's right or wrong, or they think this is right and this is wrong. I think for once they didn't center what's best for the system, and they centered what's best for the parent and what's best for the family, and really gave that agency and honored the agency of families to not think that they know better than any family or that they know what's best for any family, but they're going to facilitate what they can in order to give students and families the best choices possible. And so I thought that was really important about what's the approach that Minneapolis is taking in terms of a return to school. And so I thought that was really cool. And I think, and I hope that some of these values can continue. We can see these values in additional decisions moving forward in terms of distance learning and other decisions that Minneapolis needs to make. And so, Coolio, we have you on because last week we knew that the board had a discussion during the board meeting about returning to school, but we know that parents aren't always listening to every single board meeting and can't listen to a board meeting, and also board meetings aren't necessarily the best venue for parent and family engagement. And so you all hosted an event last Friday. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the intent and the goal of the event was and what you were trying to accomplish?
Absolutely, and I'm glad you started with that because we hosted a virtual town hall last week, as you stated, and getting the superintendent to understand that was not, when we first made the request, it wasn't honored. And we made the request because we saw our families in Minneapolis they were confused. They didn't understand what was going on. Was it safe? Was it not safe? They're getting one message from their teachers, they're getting one message from the district, they're getting another message from the community. And then, they're just like, I don't understand the stuff that they're sending me. I don't understand. I don't get. Is there a way that we can get to, the district leaders or somebody at the top to directly tell us what is going on? And can we truly, to as much certainty of a degree, can we trust the district to send our kids back to school? And when we proposed the idea to Superintendent Graffy, I had this look of, what? We have a meeting, we have these 3 meetings, school board meetings scheduled. And, to me, I'm looking like, and you think that's it? So I debated in that conversation on whether I should speak up, and I chose to speak up. And I told him, I don't care if you say yes or no to the virtual meeting, but, and I don't know if it's that you're scared to be associated with the Minnesota Parent Union, but the idea that you think that these 3 meetings is going to be enough, that those meetings are going to reach the families at Plymouth Townhomes, or your meetings are going to reach families in Cedar Riverside, you're naive. I said, the fact that we were bringing families to school, BIPOC families to those school board meetings, that took work because those spaces are not created for BIPOC people, and we don't feel comfortable in those spaces. And so we have to create our own space where we feel comfortable speaking up. And so that's what we were trying to do. And I did get a call the next morning that they agreed to do the virtual town hall. And that's how we came about having a virtual town hall with the superintendent, speaking directly to families that normally wouldn't attend a school board meeting.
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge here that even though the superintendent attended your event and participated, and from what I hear, it went really well. I think in terms of what the superintendent was able to share, you all have been very critical of Superintendent Graff and the board and the entire district. And so, this wasn't a given that the superintendent was just going to attend your event. And also,
Yeah.
I think that's important to acknowledge, in that the superintendent wasn't coming to necessarily just like a friendly event. He was coming to an event to really just give information and be asked tough questions. And so,
He
uh,
was strong-armed.
yeah, I think, but I think it's important to acknowledge that, we think that sometimes the superintendent and the administration are only, going to their own venues and creating their own spaces. But he came to your space. You all have not seen eye to eye, and you've been highly critical. And I think that's important to just acknowledge, on both ends, that you all still made the request, and that you knew that your families needed to have him, and that he accepted that request because he knew that he needed to engage with the families that you all engage with. So I think that's pretty cool. So you had this planned out. The superintendent is coming. You're marketing it. You're letting people know this is happening. So tell us what happened once the event started. What did you experience?
I experienced parent engagement. I had the superintendent there. We had translation for the main languages that are spoken in Minneapolis public schools. We had that simultaneously done with the superintendent, or as the superintendent was speaking. And the questions from BIPOC families were coming in, and I was able to ask the superintendent directly pointed questions about their concerns. And he responded in a way that, he had to respond. But overall, I thought the event went well. I felt like I created a space where families felt comfortable speaking or saying what they wanted to say or ask what they wanted to ask. It wasn't so structured to where somebody wanted to speak, they couldn't, speak, or, as I was speaking, if they didn't feel comfortable speaking in the chat. Everything went well, except for, as I'm used to, whenever, we as BIPOC people, families try to organize ourselves or try to create solutions for ourselves or try to, step up and create leadership ways for ourselves and get answers for ourselves. There's always, some body in the wing, like, hey, our ideas are better. Hey, listen to us. We're speaking on behalf of BIPOC too, even though we're not BIPOC. We're speaking on behalf of those BIPOC. And it's so disingenuous, as, these same people will march with me in the streets as I'm screaming Black Lives Matter. But when it comes to our children, they will disrespect, they will take up space, they will center themselves and don't understand their privilege.
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
Heather, I wasn't able to make the event, but you were. So can you tell us a little bit about what you experienced as someone who was watching and participating in this event?
Yeah, so what I noticed was an incredible force of white presenting teachers taking up all of the space in the chat, placing petitions in the chat, repeatedly posting in the chat after Kulia asked them very specifically to make space for parents of color to answer their questions. As a matter of fact, I think at one point, Kula, you had to turn off the comments because it was becoming so incessant. And then you made a very specific request. You paused in the midst of live translation, talking to the superintendent and his entire cabinet and all of your families. You paused, addressed the behavior in the chat, and then asked it to stop. And then what I noticed was it continued. It got a little sneakier and a little more covert, but it continued. And I just observed an utter disrespect for the purpose of the meeting and for you as a leader in that space.
Yeah. So this is everything that I've heard about what happened, and I can't imagine what feels like the entitlement to like whatever space is created, it's for me.
Yeah.
And to claim to be allies, like you said, Kulia, in like Black Lives Matter and social justice issue, and we're allies, and we want to center the experiences of the families and the people that are most impacted, and then to take the space and and all of a sudden when your privilege is challenged, right? And this is the point that we continue to bring up. When your privilege is challenged, when your power is challenged, what do you do? And I think that tells us more about you than anything else, and than anyone else. And I think that's really disappointing. And I want to connect this to what happened here is what I think is a microcosm of what's been going on over the last several months, with the behavior of MFT. I think MFT has been acting really irresponsibly with a lot of power. And I say irresponsibly because let's just acknowledge and say it. The Minneapolis Federation of Teachers is one of the most powerful political entities in Minneapolis. And with that power and with that political leadership comes responsibility. And if they are behaving internally and externally by bullying the superintendent and bullying the district and the board, by lying, by name calling, by centering their privilege and their whiteness and their entitlement when it's in spaces that are supposed to be for families of color, what is the stuff that they're hiding from us? What are they doing behind closed doors? This is what they're doing openly. And so I think it's time for us to really, hold the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers accountable, to hold, the union leadership accountable, and say, look, this isn't about union bashing, because that every time there's a critique of any union, but specifically this union, it's not just an honest critique. It can never just be that. But this is what it is. No power, especially an entity that is that powerful, should be unquestioned. But every time a question is entered, and any time a critique is made, anytime anyone asks them to, really be reflective and introspective about their own white privilege, the way that they're propping up white supremacy and entitlement, then, oh my gosh, then you see so many victims, and we see so many people complaining and saying, how could you do this? And it's frustrating when we're saying, look, this is what you've been doing. This is like repeated behaviors that are problematic. And then you wonder why people, don't listen to you, or people are just tired of being bullied and intimidated. And I think that's frustrating.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
and I
white
think
fragility is disgusting. It's on display, and we had people in their private meeting, and they didn't understand. There was one teacher who, spoke, when we have her on recording, and Rashad Turner, our executive director, has put the recording out. And as we did his show, Dark Side of Education, on Sunday, that same teacher who we got on recording was in our chats trying to explain her, why don't they understand? I don't understand why people are saying that we're privileged and we're not privileged. My son has asthma. I'm not privileged. The audacity and you know what I mean? Just the white fragility and the oh my gosh, you're coming at me. It's disgusting.
And this isn't to say, oh, sorry, go ahead, Heather.
Well, I was just going to say, Kulia, I respect you as a strong woman. I always respect the way that you hold space and speak the truth. I'm raising a daughter who reminds me a lot of the way that you show up. And what I was reflecting on is her experiences in schools with teachers, with white teachers, as she's coming into her own, and the way that you were disrespected. And I think we to me, this is a sign of how we treat the voices of students of color was reflected in that Zoom call, in the way that we spoke and took up space for parents of color, and in the way specifically you as a leader of color were treated. To me, there is a reflection of that. If that's how they treat you at your age with your stature, then what is going to happen to my 12-year-old on a school day?
And I think it's important to acknowledge that, none of this is to say that teachers should not raise their voices and
That's right.
be heard, right? Like, but anytime there is a point that, may challenge the power of the teachers or some of the privileges that teachers currently have, then it's, oh, you're silencing our voices. And that's not the case. What this is, and what we want to do is we think that the union leadership should be held accountable to the ways that they behave, that they need to be held to the same standards. Just because they have more power doesn't mean that they shouldn't have the same standards of behavior. And really, that we should expect that they lead with integrity. We know that what they've been doing over the last several months has been, again, an attempt to bully and intimidate school board members, superintendents to do what they want to do. And what they want to do is to have a safe return to schools, that's fine. But there are ways that the three of us are held accountable to ensuring that we behave. And it's important that the union also has that expectation. And, when we don't behave in those ways, we're held accountable to it. And I think, but the problem is that the union has so much power. No, everyone is afraid to hold them accountable to the ways that they act. And then when they do, when they are held accountable, then they start claiming they're oppressed. And that's the part that just really kills me, is that when we start talking about accountability, then they're talking about oppression. And go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I made sure that the questions that were coming in from the teachers and the stuff that I was hearing from the teachers, I made sure I asked those questions. I asked the superintendent pointed, are you communicating with your teachers? They're saying that you're not communicating with them. Are you sure you're going to make sure that they have the knowledge and the skills and the tools, but resources, whatever they need to make sure that this is in-person experience with students is as safe as possible? I made sure I asked those questions. And I thought he answered.
Yeah. And I think what's important, I think the thing that I ultimately want people to take away from this meeting from this recording, is that we think that, it's important that everyone's voices are brought to the table. Every stakeholder has to be heard, but it needs to be student-centered. And we think that part of leadership is integrity. And to bully your way through, and then to say you're not heard, and then to claim that you're being oppressed after you're being held accountable, like that cannot continue to be the temperature and the language of the city when we're talking about 50% of kids not being able to do their letter sounds, right? Or to not being able to read, and like special education students continually not getting services that they really desperately need right now. Like, those are the decisions, those are the things that need to be at the center of the conversation. And yes, safety of students, teachers, staff all need to be a part of that. But ultimately, what can we do to ensure that students are getting the supports that they need in order to be successful? Because they are falling further and further and further behind. And every time we try to have a conversation about students, it gets pulled back to adults, and it gets pulled back to some other concern. And I think that's, again, not going to get us to where we say we want to be as a city, in terms of education and academics, especially for students of color. Heather, what are your thoughts? What are you thinking? I see your brain kind of moving.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Kulia, how much I appreciate your ability to ask the hard questions and to name the hard thing that's in the room. For as long as I've known you and watched your advocacy, that's how I've always known you to operate. And I also find myself reflecting on, I found myself really afraid to name what I saw happening publicly, and recognizing that if I don't say what I saw happening in that space, I'm just hiding in my own privilege as a white person, and that there's no way that I should be quiet in this moment. As much as this makes me nervous because I can see the opposition coming. It's important to name when white people can do better, and when we are using our privilege, and when we are being fragile, and we are taking up too much space. It is important for other white people to name that.
Yeah, Kulia, what?
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. It's very important for sometimes, white women, especially because, in the field of education, the majority of the people in that system is white women. at some point, like I said, these same women will stand with us in the streets and scream, Black Lives Matter and Black women matter, and you know, all this stuff. But then when we step up and then we do that and we create our own space, you're still taking up space. So and playing victim and making us feel sorry for you. And we're tired of feeling sorry for you. We want to fight for our own community, and we want to lead for our own community, and we don't need the help. We
Yeah.
need the resources, but we don't need the help.
Yeah. And I think, what is important to acknowledge also is that the weaponization of people of color and communities of color to advance your own causes is also really disgusting, and is clearly what's happening here. Last week we saw during the public comments around teachers calling in to talk about a safe return to school, but then also talk about the CDD and really just try to use the fears that people have around returning to school and like the concerns around the safety of returning in person, trying to use those fears and then inject them into the CDD conversation and people's concerns around changing schools and all of that stuff. And I think that's also very, very disgusting. And then to say like, oh, and we know how families of color feel. We saw the numbers around how many families of color do want to return to school. And then to take over the spaces where families are saying, I do want to return to school, but preventing them from asking the questions that they need to know in order to get the information that they need is really, really frustrating. And I think also important to call out because we know ultimately what we're hearing is that folks want to delay the CDD. And one way in order to do that is to open the negotiation table so that they can strike. And so using the return to school as a mechanism to allow a strike to happen against the CDD, is this about returning to school safety? Is this safely? Is this about, making sure that our school system works for students of color? Or is this about the concerns around teachers moving schools and, not wanting to be in, and not wanting to give up, again, their privilege, their comfort in order to make sure that every single student is getting the support that they need. Because what I heard during the school board meetings the last few weeks is a system and a plan in order to try to keep everyone as safe as possible, and real concern for that. Serious, real concern. And I think, that's just not being heard because people are choosing not to hear it. And Julio, you've been critical of the union, you've been critical of the superintendent, you've been critical of the administration, but would you say the same thing that you're hearing and seeing a plan to keep folks safe?
I would absolutely agree. I am comfortable telling parents that the district is doing everything they possibly can to ensure the safety of your kids as much as they can. Nothing's 100% in real life, in the real world. So as much as they can, I'm comfortable in both districts that's what's happening. So yes, I'm comfortable with what Minneapolis is doing, and I'm comfortable telling families if you choose to go back, then that's a good choice.
And I think the beauty of this whole thing is, again, that families have the choice. It's not one size fits all. It's not, you have to do what we say. We know what's best. It's, what's best. We're going to give you the options that we can facilitate. And I think that's great. Any last words from anybody? Heather, any last words from you?
I hope we do more of this. Family choice. Family choice.
Julia,
Yes.
Any final words?
Yeah, just clarifying, families have that choice. There's nobody saying that you have to do one or the other. You have the choice.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it. Julia, we'll have to have you on again to talk more about what our family's seeing and hearing on the ground. Thank you for joining us today. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.